Welcome back. You're watching Ballot 2017. Just a few minutes before now, we're talking about the Supreme Court date now for the National Super Alliance as they challenge the presidential election results. So one of the reasons that the National Super Alliance leadership said had informed their decision is the crackdown on civil society organizations, namely Africa and Kenya Human Rights Commission of the last 2 days. Because we had yesterday Acting Interior Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i stepping in after a confrontation between government agencies and their right groups. In studio now, we have Dr. Sam Kamau, a political analyst, Brian Mutias, a governance analyst, and George Morara, a commissioner with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Thank you so much for making time for us today. I'll start with you, Dr. Kamau. First, what do you make of what has been happening over the last 2 days?
Hussein, I think, in Kenya, the politicization of everything makes us not appreciate or understand the issues. And if you look at this particular scenario, there are several issues that are involved. One, of course, is the timing. The second one is procedure. The other one is politics. Now, if I would look at the timing, timing is suspect, or it came at the wrong time, and it was very easy to draw the parallel or the connection between the just concluded elections and the crackdown that is taking place. So the timing is suspect and comes at the wrong time. When we talk about procedure, again, based on the law, and I'm sure we've had the legal experts argue, and also clarification from LSK and other places, then it simply shows that the right procedure was not followed because of the requirement to give notice, and also the fact that even these particular organizations have a right to respond and also to dispute some of the issues. So again, when you look at procedure, even without looking at the legality, the issue of procedure again is a problem. The third one is politics, which I said, when you introduce politics to any discussion in Kenya, the issues are normally, they disappear, the real issues that we are focusing on, and we start now looking at the political implication of everything. So even as the dust settles, because politics raises the dust and then we don't tend to focus on the issues, what is the way forward? The response by the cabinet secretary yesterday saying that a committee is being formed so that you can interrogate the issue. So there are those questions that were raised by the board, and they are important, they need to be responded to. But I think in the politics and the dust that has come up, and of course the link to what has been happening when the former prime minister indicated that part of the reason they have decided to go to court, of course, is the issue of the crackdown on these civil society organizations. Then it links to a wider pattern where we talk about the organizations that help to expand the space and ensure that conversation and debate is going on. When the dust settles, we still, of course, need to get back to the issues. In 2015, the NGO Council and its legality again is being questioned. They gave a list of about 956 NGOs that were accused of being non-compliant on specific issues, and some of them, like these two that are currently under the spotlight, one of them was mentioned in that particular list. So the issue is, once the dust settles and this committee that has been put in place, will they be able to get to the root of the matter?
Okay. Right.
Hussein, thank you for having me on studio with my colleagues here. But let me start by saying that we are a constitutional commission established under Article 59 of the Constitution. I'm saying this because I think there's been a confusion among the publics between the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and the Kenya Human Rights Commission. But having said that, I want to agree with what Kamau has said in terms of timing, procedure, and politics, but I'll add a third element, which is the trend that we are seeing. As a commission, our starting point is this: the current NGO board is actually in office as an illegality. We hold this position because in January 2013, the outgoing president then, President Mwai Kibaki, signed into law the Public Benefits Organizations Act. And we've been struggling to have this act given a commencement date. To date, we don't know why the government is very reluctant to give us a commencement date for this act, because that act is a fairly robust legal framework, provides a fairly robust legal and regulatory framework for governing the work of public benefits organizations. So we hold, and we've even gone to court. The court has actually ruled and asked, first it asked the Ministry for Devolution and Planning to give a commencement date, And then on the verge of that commencement date being given, that docket was moved to the Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government. We again moved to court with the other actors, and specifically on the 12th of May this year, the court again directed that now the ministry where this board had been moved, that's Interior and Coordination of National Government, had 30 days to actually give a commencement date for the public benefits organization. Hussein is about 90 days. That has not happened. In terms of the trend, we are seeing a very worrying trend starting from when Haki Africa and Muhuri was cited as specified entities. We have actually now seen what's happening to the Kenya Human Rights Commission and AFRICOG and all this. But specifically, even if we were operating under the old law, what Kamau has said is very germane, because even under that old law, the procedure requires that these organizations that are quote-unquote in trouble be notified. Any communication and notice by writing to their actual physical address, which are known. What I think Fazul is doing, unfortunately, he's increasingly turning himself into that very uncomfortable space of where we can call him a cyber bully. He goes out there, issues these notices online, and then without the proper procedures goes ahead to purport to implement them. And for me, that is a very worrying thing at this point in time.
Yeah, thank you, Hussein. Of course, the love-hate relationship between civil society and African government is something that has been actually a subject of discussion. While governments normally see civil society movement as a threat to national security, civil societies, on the other hand, see the government as as an oppressive tool to suppress on what they are championing as part of good governance. And I want to say that the aspect or the issue of the ongoing issues, of course, on the crackdown, of course, it's not something new. And as Kamau rightly put it, of course, the timing is very suspect, owing to the fact that we are in a situation where we are interrogating the political direction in this country, where matters of who won and who lost and the role that the civil society, especially these two bodies, played in this kind of equation. I think it begs the question why the government would want actually to crack the whip on these organizations, and what information do they have that perhaps is actually directing them to vent their anger or to get into what they are doing. When KRA comes out to say that they are actually delving into matters of issues to do with tax remittances and matters of accounts, I think those are not the only organizations that perhaps might be having these issues, and their direct role in the just concluded elections is something that begs a big question whether they are privy to some news or some information that perhaps we do not know.
Others don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. What is that information? First, I mean, it's important to note here that we tried to get the representation from government, but they didn't respond. But we saw what the rights group said, that it's infringing on their rights, and that it's on one hand telling people to seek redress in court regarding the presidential election results, and on the other hand, cracking down on them by registering them. Meaning, as has been argued, that it could have been a way to stop them from filing a petition. They have not said we were to file, but they are saying, I mean, what do you mean when you're doing this? And on the other hand, you're saying seek a redress in court. What do you say about that, Farah?
Well, I've heard those claims and statements being made out there. And in the heat of the moment, what's happening, the way these organizations came out, especially the Kenya Human Rights Commission and AFRICOG, to question the preliminary results that had been projected by the IBC at Bomas, there could be a shred of credibility to those allegations that maybe this is being done as a preemptive strategy so that these organizations couldn't go ahead and file the petition in court. We also saw some of the bloggers actually say apparently the Kenya Human Rights Commission had a tallying center and they're working in tandem with the opposition to crack the numbers. So there is actually reason to believe that they were being targeted for that. But specifically to really answer your question, when you look at what the law provides, there is nothing wrong with having these organizations that work in governance holding the government to account, including going to court when they think that things are not going the right way, because that is what we've been told should be the right procedure. So I would actually be very worried that this was done to stop them from seeking legal redress or actually enjoining with other actors to question any aspects of of the results that have been concluded they couldn't have agreed with. Yeah.
Well, of course, if you go back to 2013, AfriCog was definitely involved in the presidential election petition that took place. My greatest concern is the fact that there was no clear and imminent, clear and present danger to warrant the kind of action that we saw directed at these two particular organizations. Even based on what I said earlier, that there was a list that had been produced in 2015, they were not top on the list. So the fact that Fazul decided to narrow down on these two organizations, and there is an open or a clear link that we see between these two particular organizations, and I was about to say the opposition, but they just concluded elections because they have, AfriCog because of 2013, and then KHRC, have to be careful not to connect it, and they pronounce themselves on this particular election. So it is very hard for even the layman not to draw a link between the two, because what that produced, of course, was intimidation to any other organization. For example, if NASA had openly said we are not going to court, and maybe these two organizations would have wanted to go to court, either on their behalf or their own behalf, then any other person or any other organization, of course, would think twice, because you would think that if I happen to go to court, then I'm likely to be in trouble with the law. But the other issue, and linking to something Brian said earlier, we know the civil society, the NGOs that have been operating in Kenya, and there are quite many, and they are serving a very important and central purpose in things like in the health sector and other humanitarian areas. The major problem has been NGOs that are operating in the area of governance and human rights, because they are the ones that have found themselves on crosshairs with the government. Now, what I am saying is, we look at the politics, because this speculation now is looking at the politics in the wider context of what is happening. But once the dust settles, then we also have to think, because I think part of the challenge we have had in the past and where they introduced the PBO Act was to try and, I don't say regulate, but bring some order within that particular sector, because we know it's one of those sectors that the government allowed, of course, to flourish, but there were uncontrolled elements that ended up coming up, and that was part of the purpose of the introduction of the PBO Act. There are issues that remain there. In terms of, for example, the questions, of course, still remain in terms of compliance when it comes to tax, in terms of expatriates, whether they are working with legal, permit, and they have the right legal status to operate in Kenya. But having said that, it is very hard not to draw the link or the, between what's happening currently, that is the political environment, and the focus on these two particular organizations.
If I was to ask the three of you, very put simply, what the government did was wrong, right? Or is it the timing and procedure that was wrong? Or is it just wrong, what the government did was wrong?
I think we cannot condemn the government blankly like that it did something wrong, because of course there is the element of regulation which perhaps the NGO Council would be able to defend legally speaking, because they have all the instruments, they have all the mandate, legally speaking, to scrutinize and interrogate the workings of these institutions. The only challenge that they would not be able to defend themselves in terms of their conduct is the timing, as my two colleagues have said. This coming at a time when we are seeing actually the NASA fraternity going to courts to seek redress, and having seen that these two organizations, their role that they played in 2013 and the role that they played in the just concluded election is something to go by, then we are likely to directly link them to a potential partnership with NASA to go to the court and perhaps join themselves as interested parties. How that is going to unfold is something that we are still waiting to see how it is going to happen. But again, I think this is the time that we also need to ask ourselves the biggest questions, that do we really need to muzzle civil society movements into a situation where we are boxing them in a corner where they cannot breathe? Gone are the days which I do yearn for. How I wish they can come back, when we had a robust civil society which would work and give this country correct the anomalies that governance exhibited by then. But those days we seem to just be looking them with some nostalgia, because those are gone days. And at that point you could see civil society championing the interests of the people, human rights movements, and a vibrant sort of fraternity that we do not see it right now. You realize that by the time the NGO Council was operating in the domicile of the Devolution Ministry, it used not to be that kind of vibrant body. It could not, you could not see these surprises coming at a time like this one. But when it was moved to the matters of national security in the Ministry of, I don't know, Interior and Coordination, now we are seeing it coming out actually in a manner which actually looks suspect, in the sense that while they are saying that these organizations are deviating norms of national security, but they are not coming out clearly to demonstrate how they are doing that. And we cannot actually rule out anything else apart from, you know, what we are seeing. But politics seems to be taking the center stage in this case, and that's why I'm saying, while we want to see that we have organizations and agencies that want to be seen to be impartial, but at the same time they need also to conduct themselves that they are not going to warrant the wrath of the people of this country by not following the stipulated law and exercising something that to me looks suspect. So to me, I think while we want to say the government was not wrong, someone will say they might be wrong somehow.
Questions to answer, that's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
The government is right. You're saying the government is right to find out or to ask these NGOs questions.
Absolutely.
They should not be faulted for that.
Exactly.
But George is talking about a trend and a worrying trend and the timing.
Absolutely. Hussein, for me, I think the government is the principal custodian, the government in place, and all Kenyans of this constitution. Now, if you look at the matter of KHSC, when it first came up, KHSC went to court. They were accused of having foreign employees. They were accused of not having paid their taxes and all that. But the court, which is actually a branch of government, the judiciary, pronounced itself very well on this matter and actually said the processes and procedures that were used to question the operations of KHSC were unconstitutional, and that needed to be respected. This time round, I've looked at the allegations being laid or made against the KHSC. Other than the date on that letter, the allegations remain exactly the same. So why would you actually go back to court to canvass on the same issues that the court has clearly pronounced itself on? So in a nutshell, I think the pulling back that we are seeing, especially from the acting CS in the Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government, is a pointer that the government is increasingly realizing that clearly Fazul may be acting outside the confines of the rule of law and what is actually needed. So this extra-legal means cannot be allowed to continue. And for me, really, I don't expect a government that is actually telling people, respect the rule of law, follow the processes and procedures and all this, to be in the forefront of not leading by example. We said this yesterday as a commission. We don't understand why, up to now, the government is actually holding the directive of the court, especially in the implementation of the PBO Act, in contempt. What example are they setting? Are you telling us that as a country, we want our courts to come down with pronouncements and then nobody follows them, nobody adheres to them? Why would we have an entity that is actually already repealed in law still existing?
Well, Hussein, back to your question, I can't reduce this to a simply right or wrong. The only thing we acknowledge is that procedure was wrong. The timing is also suspect, which I would also say...
but Donara is clearly saying it's wrong.
The implication, of course, or the interpretation, and also in the court of public opinion, this looks wrong. But having said that, of course, the government still has the responsibility to maintain order, and they have information that we don't have, especially what Brian was implying, that having been moved, you know, the government tends to hide behind national security to do different things. But I wanted to say what is worrying for me as a person and as a Kenyan is that in an environment, we have made quite some progress in our, expanding the democratic space. And we know that besides the, executive and parliament and the courts, we know that civil society and the media and other organizations play an important role in terms of safeguarding some of these rights and some of these gains. So connecting to his earlier point, the trend, of course, is worrying, because when you intimidate or when you silence or you come into silence some of these organizations, of course, it's a worrying trend. The good thing is the courts are there to, let's say, protect, or at least you can always find reprieve in the courts. And again, connecting to your earlier conversation or discussion about intimidation of the Supreme Court and the organs that exist. Of course, it is important that we protect these basic freedoms that have been guaranteed by the Constitution. So the trend, of course, is worrying, because you don't know where we are likely to go next. Already the media is under significant pressure from different quarters as a result of the election. So we need these voices to keep speaking up. Of course, people are also expressing themselves on social media platforms, which has also created new challenges, because there is the good side, and I know most of the times we tend to focus on the evil. Can we talk about social media for good, instead of just looking at the negative? And again, also civil society, can we also look at the good that has been achieved by their existence? When we have a vibrant civil society, it's good for our country, it's good for democracy, it's good for progress.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think one piece of advice that I would be able to give for free to Fazul and company at the NGO Council is actually to desist from this kind of isolation mechanism or approach that they have actually taken, because they look exposed, they look so obvious. If I were them, actually, I would have just carried a so-called wider kind of netting in terms of my approach to address the issues of compliance, if that's the issue, or matters of remittances. But this kind of a narrowing down and pinpointing only two institutions, which to me and to any person knows that they were directly involved in the politics of the day in terms of the just recent elections. So if they were to cover their face, they would have actually taken a better approach in terms of carrying out a sort of nationwide kind of interrogation exercise to ensure that they hide their face. But this kind of approach exposed them so much that they looked so obvious that they had some intention in terms of maybe some forces behind them to unearth what we do not know and we are yet to know. But again, I think we have lost as a country at a time when we are looking at institutions being robust institutions, being able to put checks in terms of the excesses of the executive, the legislature, and so on and so on. But their direct involvement in the politics of the day, I think, also gives these organizations, make them vulnerable. If they were working on the health sector, maybe something to do with maternal health care, or maybe irrigation somewhere, maybe they would not have attracted the wrath of the NGO.
That's a very important point.
Let me add a little bit to what Brian is saying, and maybe what Kamau said about the good. Also looking at what these organizations have been able to do. For me, most of these problems would wither away if we really operationalized the PBO Act. The PBO Act anticipates that there could have been some rogue elements within the NGO sector that were working without a good framework for control. Now, I've heard my two colleagues mention about the NGO Council. That is supposed to be the self-regulating mechanism for the NGOs. Yes, that will be taken over by a federation. If the PBO Act is put in place, so the NGO Council, that work is taken over by the PBO Federation that will be set in place, that will continue that regulatory mechanism or a process. Then when it comes to the board, the current board that Fazul sits on, there is supposed to be established a regulatory authority for that PBO Act. And it's very robust in terms of the membership and all that. But also most importantly is that the PBO Act provides a framework for collaboration, effective collaboration between government and the public benefit organizations in a manner that we can actually even document and account how they are adding to each other's work and how they're actually building on each other's efforts, including a framework for monitoring and evaluation. So for me, really, if we were keen on having a sector that is vibrant, a sector that is actually based on mutual collaboration and trust between government and the PBO sector, then this is the high time we actually moved ahead and operationalized that. Quickly on the good, let me mention two things, because I also have a history with the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Without the Kenya Human Rights Commission, the men and women who gallantly fought for this country, the so-called forgotten veterans of the Mau Mau liberation movement, would not have been recognized. The Kenya Human Rights Commission took up that case. We now have a small monument in their honor, the Freedom Corner. That is something that you can't take away. And those men and women are forever grateful for that work. Number two is the recent case of the citizenship of the Makonde people. We saw they were given that citizenship, and they became a very key constituency. We saw politicians going in there to woo them, to vote for them. So again, even as you look at trying to rein in this sector, let's balance the good that this sector has also done.
Okay.
Yes.
Just want to ask this tomorrow. Okay. So, I mean, we had Acting Interior Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i saying the PS will now form an inclusive team to work with NGOs. Coordination board reviews compliance status of the two organizations.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, suspend any action of this organization for the next 90 days to enable the team work with NGOs.
Yes.
So is this a solution really, or from where you stand, forget about all this, just commence the PBO Act?
Actually, that will be the perfect solution. Forget about all this, commence the PBO Act.
Okay.
Maybe I can start there. The CS acknowledged that Fazul's letter raised some weighty legal issues, if I can remember
political issues.
That means those issues will not go away.
Yes.
Those questions need to be addressed. And the formation of this committee is actually to focus on those particular issues. But as he's bringing out, there is a wider solution to this, because this is not this one is actually focusing on these two particular organizations. There is a wider problem that is likely to to come up unless this act is operationalized. Having said that, Hussein, I know we are looking at civil society as if they are neutral. That is also the other challenge. We know that some of these organizations have had an open association with the opposition, which of course may have place them where they are at this particular point in time. I know, and I have said that because I have seen the reports, if you look at some of the international media reports, they'll talk of AfriCog as a pro-democracy lobby. I saw another one saying pro-opposition. So you look at it, of course, the politics is not lost, there. Even as we say we are fighting for expanded space, the open flirting that we have also seen between these two organizations with the opposition, of course, could have informed the current environment and the reaction or the response from the government. So the other thing, of course, as we talk about, and that is why I say the organizations that are working in the area of governance and human rights
seem to have run-ins with
the major reason, of course, is because of that open alliance. At times they don't hide an open alliance with the opposition, which of course then brings into questions which agenda they are driving. Now that in itself,
which sometimes that alliance could be deliberate or inadvertent at times.
Yes. But there are times you look at it and and of course I can't quite make the judgment and say that this is deliberate or they are just trying to fight for the increases. But I'm saying we also have to look at that particular angle as you look at also the government response, because you can't pull politics out of it.
Okay. And just linking together with what Sam is saying, I think personally I would want to vote for what the workings of the NGO Council, because this is an organization which has to streamline its operations in terms of having mechanisms for constant monitoring and evaluation of the activities of the constituents that they do operate under. Because when you look at the way they operate, just like KRI, which constantly pays off people to ensure that they constantly comply with the certain legal requirements in terms of remittances. I don't know how hard Fazul and the company is it for them to put mechanisms for ensuring that they constantly keep monitoring the workings, the remittances and the operations and even the inflows and outflows of their finances, other than just sensationally coming out at a time which is suspect, as I rightly put it before. They ought to have gotten this earlier in advance to put mechanisms which are able to put these organizations in checks and balances to ensure that there is constant exchange of information, traffic flow between the organization, the council and the NGOs. But this kind of all of a sudden coming out in the media space and claiming that these organizations are not complying, this is something that if there was an anomaly, you ought to have nipped it at the bud earlier before. And this is actually a sort of piece of advice in terms of operationalization of how they would want to streamline the civil society. They can borrow a leaf from the workings of experts of monitoring and evaluation and see how timely these organizations can have a reporting mechanism, constantly reporting on what they are doing in a sort of a logo frame. And from that way, NGO Council is able to track the activities, the inflows, the finances, and even the compliance issues and all that, without, surprising us as a country that certain organizations are not compliant at a time when they are working, directly with the political aspect of the day. Okay, thank you so much. And again, we have to say here, we sought government's presence in this and response, but they did not respond to us. So we thank you so much. Dr. Sam Kamau, political analyst, and Brian Mutie, governance analyst.
And of course, George Marara, Commissioner with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Thank you so much for making time for us. We're taking a short break. Ballots 2017 continues shortly.